I want to tell you about something that happened to me about 6 years ago now. I was 31 years old. Not a kid, not someone prone to flights of imagination, not someone who had ever had a paranormal experience before this, or who was particularly looking for one. I was a guy who owned a house in a semi-rural area outside a small Midwestern town, who worked a desk job, who spent his weekends doing normal adult things like mowing the lawn and watching football and occasionally getting around to the home improvement projects that had been on the list since I moved in. I want to be clear about that context because I think it matters. This is not a story about a sensitive, creative type who goes looking for the mystical. This is a story about a completely ordinary man who one night in August followed something into the woods behind his house and has never quite been the same since. The house came with woods. That was part of the appeal when I bought it. About an acre of yard and then a tree line, and then a couple hundred acres of second-growth forest that belonged to no one in particular. A mix of parcels that nobody was doing much with. I'd poked around back there a few times in the first months after I moved in, just getting the lay of the land, learning the property. There was a creek that ran through the lower section, an old fence line that had been swallowed almost entirely by undergrowth. A clear path that wound up to a high spot where the trees opened up into a rough clearing with a decent view of the sky. Nice piece of land to have behind your house. I didn't spend much time back there after those first exploratory walks. The way you don't spend time in things that are just quietly available and not demanding your attention. The night it happened was a Saturday in August. I'd been out on the back deck after dinner, the way I like to do in summer, just sitting with a beer and letting the day finish. It was warm and still, the kind of August night where the air barely moves and everything feels like it's holding its breath a little. No clouds. The stars were coming out as it got dark. First one, then a few, then the whole spread of them, which you can actually see from out there, away from the worst of the light pollution. It was a good night to be outside doing nothing. I was in no hurry to go in. I'd been out there maybe an hour, second beer, fully dark by now, and I saw a light at the tree line. Small, about the size of a baseball from where I was sitting, maybe 60 yards away. A cool white light, not quite blue but with blue in it, the color of something between starlight and moonlight. Not a firefly. I knew fireflies, wrong color, no flicker. Not a flashlight, no beam, no scatter. Just the light itself, contained and steady, hovering at about chest height at the edge of the trees. I watched it for a couple of minutes. It moved along the tree line, slowly, no urgency to it, drifted left for maybe 30 feet, and then came back and stopped at a gap in the trees where I knew the path went in. Just sat there, steady, at the entrance to the path. Now look, I'm a practical guy. My first thought was not paranormal. My first thought was that someone was back there. Maybe a neighbor kid cutting through, maybe a hunter checking trail cameras, and what I was seeing was some kind of equipment light or phone screen. I set my beer down and walked across the yard toward the tree line to see what was going on. The closer I got, the clearer it became that it was not a phone screen or a piece of equipment. It was a sphere of light, roughly, not perfect but close, floating in the air without any apparent source and without casting any illumination on the things around it. The bark of the trees nearby was not lit up by it. The path beneath it was not lit up. It simply existed in the air, self-contained, and waited while I walked toward it. I got within about 15 feet of it and stopped. I'm not going to pretend I wasn't unsettled because I was, a little, not frightened. My heart wasn't hammering. I wasn't looking for an exit. Just that heightened attention that comes when something doesn't fit the available categories. I stood there looking at it, and it sat there being looked at, and then it moved into the trees, slowly, along the path, that same unhurried drift. And I stood there for a second making a decision. I followed it. I went back and grabbed my flashlight from just inside the back door. I'm practical, I told you, and I followed the light into the woods. It stayed ahead of me, consistent, 20 feet or so, moving along the path at a pace that was easy to match. I cut my flashlight off. I didn't need it. The light ahead of me was enough to orient by, and the path was familiar enough that I could follow it without trouble. And there was something about the night back there in the trees that I didn't want to disrupt with a flashlight beam. The quality of it. The stillness and the depth of the silence and the particular feeling of the air, which was cooler than it should have been for an August night and very still and very present is the word I keep coming back to. The woods felt present, occupied but not threateningly so, like walking into a room where something is already happening. The light took me up the path toward the high clearing. I'd been there before, in daylight, that rough oval of open ground in the trees, long grass, wide view of sky. Maybe a 15-minute walk from the yard. The light moved steadily and I followed, and neither of us was in a hurry. The clearing at night under that August sky was something I wasn't prepared for and couldn't have been. No moon, the Milky Way from edge to edge, that full river of it, the kind of sky that reminds you that space is real and enormous, and you are a very small thing standing on a rock in the middle of it. The clearing was dark except for the stars and the light floating at its center, and for a moment I just stood at the tree line and looked at the whole picture. The open grass and the enormous sky and the single cool white light hovering in the middle of it all, and I felt something that I don't have a better word for than awe. Just that. Pure awe, uncomplicated, the way I imagine people felt standing at the edge of canyons or oceans before those things became familiar. Then more lights came. They appeared at the edges of the clearing, one at a time, drifting in from the tree line on different sides. Same size, same color, same quality. I counted as they came in. 6, then a 7th, then an 8th. They moved into the clearing slowly and then settled, if that's the right word, into positions distributed through the space at various heights. Not a pattern I could identify, not geometric, just arranged in a way that felt considered. Balanced without being symmetrical, like someone had thought about where they should be and placed them thoughtfully. I stood at the edge of the clearing with my unlit flashlight in my hand and I watched them. They moved occasionally, small drifting adjustments, the way a boat moves when it's anchored in still water, and the water is never entirely still. But mostly they were stationary. Mostly they were just there, in the clearing, in the enormous sky, doing whatever they were doing. They didn't react to my presence in any way I could detect. No movement toward me or away from me, no change in their behavior. I had the distinct sense of being tolerated, which is a strange thing to feel in the middle of your own woods at midnight, but that was the feeling. Tolerated, present at the edge of something that didn't require my participation but had no particular objection to my witnessing it. I stood there for a long time. I genuinely could not tell you how long. Time was doing something unusual, or my relationship to it was the kind of thing that happens when you're paying attention with your whole self to something and the counting function in your brain quietly shuts off because it has more important things to do. I was cold at some point and didn't care about being cold. My feet were wet from the long grass and I didn't care about that either. At some point one of the outer lights began to rise, slowly, steadily, straight up above the tree line and into the sky above the clearing. I watched it go until it wasn't distinct from the stars anymore. Then another one rose. Then another, one at a time at irregular intervals, each rising at its own pace, each disappearing into the star field above. The last one was the one that had led me in, or I believed it was. There was no way to be certain. They were identical as far as I could tell, but I had the feeling it was the first one. The one from the tree line, the one that had waited at the path entrance while I walked across the yard. It waited until all the others had gone, and then it rose too, unhurried, steady, and I watched it until the sky had it, and there was nothing left in the clearing but long grass and the full August sky, and me standing at the edge of it with a flashlight I'd never turned on. I walked home. I sat back down on the deck. My beer was still there, gone warm. I sat with it for a long time, not drinking it, just sitting, looking at the tree line where the path went in. The woods were dark and still and gave nothing away. I've thought about that night a lot over the last 6 years. I thought about it the way you think about something that changed you slightly, but permanently, in a direction you can't entirely measure, like you know you're different after it, but you can't point to a specific thing and say that's what shifted. I've read about ball lightning, which is the standard rational explanation for lights like that, and I've read about will-o'-the-wisps and various other phenomena that cultures across the world have reported for centuries, from marshes and forests and open fields. I've sat with all the explanations and not been able to make any of them fully account for what I saw. What I keep coming back to is the quality of those lights, the sense they gave of having their own business, their own purpose, whatever that was, entirely apart from me. The gathering and the arrangement and the rising, whatever that was, it was not random atmospheric plasma, it was not swamp gas. It had the quality of something organized and intentional, not in a human way, not in a way I had a framework for, but intentional in the way that a murmuration of starlings is intentional, not planned by any individual, but unmistakably purposeful in its shape. I've been back to that clearing many times since. Daytime mostly, sometimes evening, once or twice at night. Nothing has happened back there since that August. The clearing is what it always was, a patch of open ground on high land with a good view of the sky. The grass grows and gets long and the trees hold their ground around the edges, and the sky does what the sky does. But I always pause at the edge of it when I go back, just for a moment, just to stand there and look at the space and the sky above it, and remember what it looked like with 8 cool white lights distributed through the air in their considered, balanced arrangement, doing their business in the dark under the Milky Way. I've never felt frightened by the memory. That's the thing that surprises me most when I think about it, even now. There was nothing in that clearing that night that meant me any harm, or was even particularly interested in me. I was a man who had wandered into the edge of something that had nothing to do with him and had been permitted to watch. That's a gift if you think about it. Whatever they were, wherever they went when they rose into that August sky and became indistinguishable from the stars, I'm glad I followed the light in. I'm glad I didn't stay on the deck with my warm beer. I'm glad I was the kind of person who, on that particular night, decided to go see. Some things are worth following into the dark. Sleep well tonight. The sky above you is full of things going about their business, quietly, unhurried, in the dark. They don't need you to understand them. They just need you to occasionally look up.